time, and nearly a year after he made his first revelations about the NSA's global eavesdropping, has given a long sit-down interview to U.S. television network NBC. He did so in Moscow. With us to talk about it from, he's at Harvard University, Charles Kogan, who was in a previous life the CIA bureau chief here in Paris. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Olivier Chopin, author in French of Why is America Spying on Us? Fabrice Ebelpoint, who teaches all about surveillance and all sorts of privacy and identity issues at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Jean-Pierre Larochelle, political commentator and blogger as Euromaestro. And journalist Florence Hartmann, the recent author in French of Whistleblowers, The Bad Consciences of Our Democracy. Now, I know in your book you say it, that what inspired you to write this book was your own personal experience. You were spokesperson for the International Criminal Court covering that was dealing with Slobodan Milosevic at the time. And so what happened? When you're a whistleblower, one day in 2006, you have this epiphany. You say, I can't take it anymore.
No, I was not a whistleblower because I published a book after I left my position, and I investigate myself on a story which has not been investigated while I was the spokesperson by my former colleagues, journalists. So I jumped back as a journalist and I investigate. But the tribunal said that it's something I knew from...
Yeah, I was going to say, you took a lot of flack for it.
From the tribunal, and I couldn't protest to that because I didn't want to disclose my source. So I respect the rules of journalists. I didn't disclose my source. And I just show how the judges of an international tribunal established to punish those who commit war crimes and genocide in the former Yugoslavia and in Rwanda were not respecting the law, made deals with states in order to hide evidence which was about war crimes, about genocide. And I just explained exactly the information was known, but with no name. I just said it's this judge, and they sign an illegal document and decision on that day and that day. And I was convicted to 7 days in jail for that.
Now, we all, looking at the interview that Edward Snowden gave, you realize the stakes a lot higher for him since he risks going to prison, obviously, if he goes back to the United States. What was your reaction when we finally got to see him sit down, speak? What were your thoughts?
Well, that was not the first time we see him speaking and
but
giving
in a long
each
format
time.
like this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, he is in front of a big dilemma because he never refused to go in front of justice because he acknowledged, as we said, that he made one violation in order to disclose another violation. So in court, both violations should be dealt together parallelly by the judges, and not only one. Impunity for those who are said to have violated, and we have quite a lot of evidence that the rules were not respected by the NSA or other organization. And only Snowden would be judged. It's what happened with Bradley Manning. It was just, well, you violated the rules you disclosed those videos, but we never had anyone tried at the same time, or the issue of torture reintroduced in a democratic army as it was for the US.
The ills he addressed were not being addressed, you're saying, in parallel.
Yeah, that's why it's not patriot or an enemy. It's an issue of debate about democracy. Democracy has rules, framework, and everyone has to respect them. The citizen, the government, their duty, obligation, and everyone should play its own role. Otherwise, it doesn't function. And he's just opening the debate.
That's not how the U.S. government sees it. Ahead of Snowden's broadcast, the U.S. Secretary of State offering up a counter-narrative.
The bottom line is, this is a man who has betrayed his country, who is sitting in Russia, an authoritarian country, where he has taken refuge. He should man up and come back to the United States. If he has a complaint about what's the matter with American surveillance, come back here and stand in our system of justice and make his case.
Jean-Pierre Larochelle.
Well, as he pointed out in his interview, he's not able to make his case if he returns to justice because of the nature of the crimes he's accused of under the Espionage Act would require him to go into a secret court. And he would also be deprived of being able to make a defense because of security concerns. So I think it's somewhat disingenuous. Also, the issue of him being in Russia, as he points out, Russia was not his choice destination. He was en route to South America via Cuba, and he was forced to be in Russia, or to stay in Russia, because the United States decided to revoke his passport. So I think sort of throwing the Russia thing out there isn't quite clear. The other thing on this unconstitutionality issue that we talked about earlier, and the fact that it's being illegal, this has already been acknowledged, again, as Snowden pointed out in his interview, by all three branches of the government. It's been determined by the secret court that oversees the NSA. It's been determined now by an open court for the first time. By all three branches of government, it's been declared Orwellian by a U.S. court. And even the president himself has appointed 2 independent commissions that looked in it. And they've all agreed that the programs need to be reformed and changed, and they're in the process of ending the bulk collection of this data. So in terms of the points that he's raising, he's actually been vindicated by all branches of the government. So I think it's a little disingenuous to pretend like there's still a debate, well, was it illegal? Even the NSA admits in their own audit that the programs were illegal and that they illegally instructed their agents to misinform and give disinformation to the congressional oversight committees on the nature of their programs.
Charles Kogan, do you take the point?
Well, I would like to make a clarification. First of all, to my mind, there are 3 categories of countries as viewed by the U.S. for intelligence purposes. The first are the Five Eyes countries: Britain, the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia. In the second category, there are countries with whom the U.S. cooperates but does not have a no-spy agreement. In the third category, there are countries where there is no cooperation. Now, I did an article for the French magazine Commentaire a couple of years ago detailing the narration of the no-spy agreement that was proposed with France but was canceled by the White House. And this was the brainchild of the then Director of National Intelligence, Admiral Blair, who lost his job partly as a result of this snafu over the abortive no-spy agreement with France. Now, I'd like to make one other comment, and that is, I've read the Greenwald book, and interestingly, it is silent on how Snowden got out of Hong Kong. How did he happen to get on a Russian plane? Was he in Russian custody? Was he in a Russian safe house before he got on the plane? We don't know. I think probably what he said is true, that he intended to get to a Latin American country and the U.S. took away his passport, so he was he couldn't do it.
Are you insinuating that Are you insinuating that Russia helped him?
I think it's a matter of it's an open question, because it's very strange that Greenwald, who goes into great detail about how he established contact with Snowden in Hong Kong, says nothing about how Snowden got out of Hong Kong.
Fabrice Abelpoint?
It's quite fascinating, because when I was a kid, I'm 40 years old now. When I was a kid, we could witness the exact same situation with Russian spy flying to the United States to get freedom. And today it's the exact opposite. It's really astonishing how in a little less than 20 years, less than 30 years, the situation is the exact opposite.
You say it's the exact opposite.
Not the exact opposite, but really it's astonishing
let's
how this has
Let's talk
evolved.
about Snowden in Russia. He surprised many when he popped up as one of the callers recently on Vladimir Putin's annual phone-in show with ordinary citizens. Even some of Snowden's defenders objected to it, saying it played into the Russian president's hand. On NBC, Snowden categorically denying any special relationship with Moscow and in no uncertain terms denouncing Russia's new censorship laws on bloggers.
I have no relationship with the Russian government at all. I've never met the Russian president. I'm not supported by the Russian government. I'm not taking money from the Russian government. I'm not a spy.
Charles Kogan, you're unconvinced.
I think it's possible that he's fabricating all that. We just don't know. But it's an area of shadows. We don't know exactly what his relationship with the Russians is. We have to assume that he's given a lot of material to the Russians. I think you have to make that assumption if you're deciding how to react operationally.
He says he hasn't.
What he says may or may not be true.
So you're saying the U.S. has no intelligence capabilities to determine if secrets have been leaked to the Russians or not?
We don't have any contact with him in Russia.
Cisco, maybe?
How would we know?
Microsoft?
Well, I thought that was the purpose of intelligence agencies. But
it does put Edward Snowden in. There was a lot of criticism when Snowden appeared on that call-in show. And it did make him look like he was serving the interests of the Russian president.
Yeah, I think there's a legitimate question, and I think he acknowledged that there's a legitimate question because at the same time he's concerned about privacy laws and those not being respected. Obviously, there's a concern in Russia. He was very clear, however, in last night's program about his condemnation of the Russian program, and he acknowledged that it's a country that doesn't have respect for those rights. In terms of intelligence sharing between countries, we should acknowledge that France, for instance, has intelligence sharing arrangements with the United Kingdom, and they have shared information with the United Kingdom, and one of the conditions of sharing that information is that it's not released to third parties without the knowledge or consent of the French government. Well, what's happened in the case with the information that France has shared with the UK is the UK turns around and shares this information with the US without letting the French officials know about this.
All right. And again, these questions still being pondered. Snowden wants to go home. According, though, to journalist Glenn Greenwald, he's better off in Russia right now than in prison.
He gets to put his head on his pillow every night with the knowledge that he took decisive, meaningful action in defense of the political values that he has always said he believes in. And not many people in the world are able to say that. And that has given him an extraordinary amount of internal tranquility and peace and fulfillment that I'd say makes him probably one of the happiest people I know.
One of the happiest people that Glenn Greenwald knows. Olivier Chopin, your thoughts?
Really? I don't know. I think everything in that case is a narrative, one coming from Snowden himself, one coming from Greenwald, another one coming from The Guardian. Luke Harding wrote a book about the whole story before Greenwald released his own book. And they tend to explain the same thing. Most of it must have been accidental at some point. He did not choose to go there. He did not choose to release information at some point. He had a very strong process to contact Greenwald. That's the only thing we know for sure.
Right, so there's not always a master plan. There's sometimes a lot of improvisation.
Yes, I believe there was mix.
Yeah. Actually, there was sort of a plan because this was a strong concern of his for a long time. Because 6 months before he ever released any of these documents, he was already hosting crypto parties in Hawaii, where he was instructing and training other people on how to circumvent the surveillance programs.
All right, there's a point I want to ask the panel about, and that is Jean-Pierre Larochelle mentioned it already. There's been a wholesale rethink in U.S. intelligence circles on how they deal with this data. What is the fallout globally? Is there one here in France? I'll put it to you, Fabrice Belpoint. Are the French having a rethink about the way they conduct eavesdropping on a planetary scale?
Well, actually, France voted a law last December that legalized global surveillance on the whole planet and on the French population. It is now legal to do so. Of course, France has been doing so since it was technically possible, which means approximately 2008.
And you think that this is in reaction to the Snowden revelations?
I think this is, yes, in some sort a reaction to Snowden, because basically it's now legal. France has been doing this for years, but for 6 months now it is totally legal, and it's legal for the executive branch to spy on everybody, especially on parliament and on justice and media, which is a really major change in the way democracy works in this country.
Is that a good thing, the fact that this law is...
I'm afraid not.
Charles Kogan.
Yes, it's very interesting, the difference in the reaction of the French vis-a-vis the Germans. The Germans have had a lot of heartburn about U.S. spying on them. The French have handled this in a very low-key manner. they sent an intelligence delegation, not a political level delegation, to Washington. And President Hollande has said that the matter is cleared up. Of course, there's been a very close relationship, both in signals intelligence and otherwise, between the United States and France. And another factor, I think,
but
is
you also, sorry, on that
France
point,
Charles
Kogan, on that point, you have to empathize with the Germans who have still fresh in their memory the secret police, the Stasi of East Germany.
That is true. And also there is the fact that, to my knowledge, the Germans did not spy on the United States during the Cold War to the extent that the French did, and it's well known, well documented. They would rifle the suitcases of American businessmen passing through Paris and so forth and so on. We all know that. But that doesn't
did it work both ways?
Deny the fact that there's a very close cooperation between the United States and France in the intelligence arena.
Did it work both ways?
Excuse me?
Was the U.S. also spying on the French?
Of course.
Of course, and one of the issues, and Charles Kogan spelled it out at the beginning of our conversation, is that there's two levers. There's what trawling for what they call metadata, and then this business of the Prism Affair, and what's also one of the important aspects of this is this sort of public-private partnership when it comes to spying.
Yes, this is very disturbing. Actually, it was known before the Snowden leaks that there was some sort of private partnership between companies like Microsoft and the NSA, but it is happening on a much more global scale. There is still question about Google's implication with the NSA. There is still question about lots of other technological companies from the Silicon Valley. How are they working with the NSA? We still don't know. We probably will never know. But they have lost lots of confidence from the users right now. And to get back to the to the difference you were pointing out between Germany and France, it is really astonishing to see how the German population reacts strongly against the mass surveillance of the population, whereas the French population doesn't care at all.
Why?
Part of the explanation is the way German handled the post-war era and the East Germany
right,
history.
We know that part, but why don't the French care more?
I'm afraid the French
are...
Go ahead, Charles Kogan.
The French are désabusés, if you will. They're
Jaded.
a long-standing country in Europe, the oldest country in Europe along with England. Germany is a country only since the 19th century. The French have been doing this for centuries. They're used to it. I want to add one point. There's a third category of information that the NSA collected according to the Snowden revelations, and that is the tapping of fiber optic cables across the Atlantic. I don't know whether it was done by the British or the Americans, but it was another factor, another collection fact that surfaced with the Snowden documents.
Olivier Chapman.
The French people is also more used to be monitored by his own state and government. We have a strong tradition of political police, the renseignements généraux, things like that. We have already
dating back to before Napoleon.
Yeah, and our big scandal exploded under François Mitterrand when they phone tapped journalists and average people to protect a state secret that was a private secret, his daughter. So at some point, the debates that start to emerge in the US or in Germany, we have already had them in the past. And it doesn't mean that we are less sensitive, but we are kind of used to deal with those kind of issues. So it's not necessarily a big issue for the public or the journalists.
And let me ask you this. When we're hearing the names of the companies that Fabrice was mentioning, Silicon Valley, Microsoft companies, when you hear Charles Kogan talking about the fiber optic cables being tapped perhaps, you really get a sense, here we are, 7 billion of us on the planet, but when it comes to the digital economy, it's the US and perhaps the US and the UK who own the candy store.
Yes, because for now, the World Wide Web and all its infrastructure is American. But it's maybe it's accidental history, you know.
What's interesting is that there is a concern because these companies did cooperate with the intelligence agencies, and the few companies that have tried to provide privacy to their users, LavaBit, for instance, is the email service that Snowden had used to make his contact with journalists, have been shut down because the federal government goes after these agencies, after these companies that provide these types of services and demand the keys to unlock the passwords.
So what does the future hold?
The future holds surveillance society, unfortunately.
But will it still be an American?
No, not at all. To go back to America holds the candy store when it comes to software. When it comes to Google, when it comes to Facebook, it's American. When it comes to infrastructure, France is a very big player. If you want to connect Africa to the rest of the world, if you want to connect the Middle East to the rest of the world, you have to deal with French companies. And if you want to listen to Africa and the Middle East, you have to partnership with France. And France is a really big key player in this global surveillance state that is being built right now. And it will have a really big role in shaping the 21st century. And it's not a nice role.
It's not a nice war.
It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be a democracy. It's going to be a global governance with local governance, nation states. Maybe Europe will have a role in this, and they will monitor their own population in order to have, let's say, some sort of peace and stability.
What the state governments have been able to do, actually, is to get around the constraints placed by law by having intelligence agencies of other countries collect the information and then share that information.
Or even having their own surveillance system set up in foreign state. This is the case for France. France's global surveillance system is mostly set up in foreign state. Dictation,
in any case, it will not be legal because there are national but also international conventions and rules which are binding for all countries. The problem is that's why French are désabusés, or I don't know. It's because you don't know to whom to turn to in order to put some.
There's a lack of checks and balances in this country.
Yeah, because there was a hope with the European Parliament, but it doesn't work, and there is no enough information in order to say this law or this mechanism of spying is not entitled. We don't have the elements in order to cut or to define as illegal those proceedings. That's the problem. But we have a big democracy crisis.
Charles Kogan, do you agree with that assessment? I was going to say, do you agree that individual rights are going to be eroded as time goes on, the way it's been described by Fabrice and Florence?
Can I add something at this point? There is a reform bill that has been passed by the House of Representatives. It is now before the Senate, and the gist of it is that the metadata will not be stored anymore by the NSA. It will be stored by the private phone companies, private companies. Secondly, you cannot access this metadata except under certain restricted situations in which there is a clear connection with a possible terrorist. It's called the two contacts rule.
And do you have faith in the system? Do you have faith in the system, Charles Kogan? Do you have faith in the system?
Sorry?
Do you have faith that the system will improve going forward?
I think it will, yes, because there's a tremendous uproar, particularly among lawyers and privacy advocates about this situation. And it's crying out for reform among these groups, and I think there will be eventually reforms. But this is the first step, this new law coming into effect.
And I think
depends if the Senate approves it.
Very quick.
I think we have to acknowledge the only reason we have these reforms is because of the revelations by Snowden.
All right, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you.
That is true.
I want to thank you. Consensus on that point. Jean-Pierre Larochelle, I want to thank Olivier Chopin. I want to thank as well Fabrice Ebelpoint, Florence Hartmann, and Charles Kogan for joining us from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.